all those things and so much more. Just grab a seat in the chair or the floor. Sit back, relax, recline, while she drops another casual line. You're tuned into Casually Molly with Molly and Bergie.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Casually Molly podcast. As you already know, I am your host, Molly Ambergy. Well, I guess, though, for people who don't know, here I am. You can see the handle. If you're watching on YouTube, follow us at the Casually Molly podcast. I interview comedians, artists, entertainers, you name it, every week. But this week, I am very fortunate to have Carlo, Pietro, Sanfilippo on the podcast. Give it up for Carlo, everybody. Hi. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. Actually, Grace. Oh, look, we've got Carlo_blog, right? We're very professional around here. So,
Nice.
Carlo, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Like, if for people that are newly listening in, what should we know about you?
Okay. Well, so I'm a new author.
Mm-hmm.
That was my first book ever. For 26 years, I had been a financial planner and was a dad and all these things. And then about a decade ago, my life went through some turmoil. I lost my parents, I got divorced and all these things. And I took a step back through all that and began to live more intentionally and do the things I really had wanted to do when I was a kid.
Okay.
And I wrote a story about that and started a podcast about that. And my life is still transforming as a result of the things I started, a decade ago when I went through this, what I call like a winter of life.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
We're going to get into that in a second.
Okay.
Grace, for those of us watching on YouTube, can you pop up the cover of Afterlife? All right, here we go. This is a great cover art, by the way. Who did the cover art for it?
My publisher helped me find.
Yeah.
I don't know who the actual person was, but
That's okay.
she worked with a graphic designer and gave the person a synopsis of the book,
Mm-hmm.
and they gave me 10 or 12 options, and I saw that one. It was just like, that's it, because it's called Afterlife.
Yes.
It's sometimes people are like, was it a book about dying?
Right.
Well, no, which
You're
is weird,
right.
but I felt my life was so changed. I felt like the old Carlo was gone. Like
Yeah.
so many aspects of my old life just didn't make sense anymore. So
Yes.
it made sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
but that's that. I saw that book and I'm like, that's how I feel. That's how I'm seeing life the way I'm seeing a life that feels fun and engaging and exciting.
Well, I wanted to give you props on that really quickly. And then how do we find it for people that are looking at it, they're like, that cover's engaging, that what you just said sounded very engaging. Where can we look for it?
Well, there's all kinds of information about me, the book, and the podcast on www.carloblog.com.
Mm-hmm.
And the book is for sale anywhere you would buy a book.
Yes.
Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure we got that plug in, just because I always like to start in the beginning. Where can we go? How can we do this? So that way we can unfold into all the gritty details in a
Sweet.
second. So, well, I appreciate you coming on. Like I said earlier, I always like to interview people, and I find it very interesting that you started a book and a podcast. What started first? Was like the book kind of grew into the podcast? Just give us from the very beginning. You said you went through some turmoil. Sometimes people use like I told you, I do comedy and theater, and I kind of use that artistic endeavor and path to kind of unfold things in my life as well. But why writing? Why use a book for that?
Okay. Well, I had been a financial planner for 26 years.
Mm-hmm.
And as I made all these changes from the dark period I went through and I started to live my personal life more intentionally, I saw how I didn't like a lot of aspects of my industry and my business. So I was trying to repackage the service that I provided to people. And so I made a lot of changes in my business and I wanted to start articulating that. I had a blog for a while and I wanted to do a podcast. Well, if you know, in financial services, there's this thing called compliance that makes everything very, very, very complicated and difficult. And and I kept going around circles with them about, about how it would work. And finally, the compliance officer said, well, this sounds like you could really do this as what's called an outside business activity. So something completely separate from the business, which is, so I thought, okay, at first I was a little frustrated because I was like, I want to do this for the business. But then I realized how much more freedom that gave me. So then I sat down with a friend of mine who had helped me a lot with my blog for the old business. And she really tried to help me articulate my message and who's this for and all that kind of stuff that I'm terrible at and not good at. And I realized I didn't have a clear focus of what I was trying to say. So she sent me to another buddy that's also good at that kind of thing. He goes, well, you know, sometimes people write books to do that. I'm like, well, maybe I could write a book. And so another friend of mine said, well, I know someone that is a book coach. So you should call Nancy, and Nancy is a book coach and she helps people with nonfiction books. So I called Nancy, and Nancy helped me pull these. Literally, I felt like I've never given birth. But it felt like she pulled and delivered this thing from me, is the way it felt like. Like, she really helped me. She gave me the faith in myself to do it and helped me articulate what my thoughts were. And so then once the book was done, as she was doing her final editing, then it became clear to me, like, I want to do a podcast about other people's lives and things that they're doing, and how did they get this? Because I'm not trying to be a guru or a coach or anything like that. I just want to give examples of people that are doing fun things and living the life that they want.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that really leads into my next part and question on here. I haven't finished the book yet, you guys, but I got to tell you, I am glued, like I said earlier before we started recording, I am so glued to your journey. We talk about the journey a lot here for people who are familiar with the podcast. I relate to it, and I'm sure a lot of readers do too, because we're all on a journey, and I'm in the same kind of, not similar place, but maybe similar. I'm trying to think of the right word. See, I'm trying to figure out what I want to do too, and it's hard to focus on that. But when you're trying to figure yourself out, that happens a lot. Mm-hmm. And seeing somebody else write out their journey and how they're turning their turmoil into some really positive aspects of their life. What really touched me was that for the first couple of chapters I've been reading in, you had something about the room of requirement, which you made a Harry Potter reference on. I really appreciate that. And you took something like, was it a fireplace mantle? Uh-huh. And you turned it into an entertainment center. Right. And even something small like that, which really wasn't that small, I'm sure was a lot of work that went into it. You took something that people would be like, oh, that's trash, that's toxic, we don't need that. And you made it into something really beautiful. Should we expect that throughout the next chapters of the book?
Yeah, well, so a little bit on that, like, you know, I moved out. When I got divorced, I moved into a place by myself, and I had, you know, my books, my furniture, my clothes. No, furniture. I had one piece of furniture, an armoire.
Yes.
So my books, my tools, my clothes, and the armoire. That was it.
Yeah.
And I borrowed a card table. I had no furniture, so I had this big empty space. And so, yeah, I decided, through a series of things, I decided to make my own furniture, and that was really just. I had all this, so I didn't have my kids. All of a sudden, I went from being a full-time dad to, like, my kids weren't with me half the time. And it's, you know, people always talk about being free, whether it's retirement or whatever it might be, but it also can be very scary.
Right.
Because, like, all of a sudden I had all this time, and I'm like, well, I could do anything, but what? What do I want to do? I haven't had that as a choice for so long. Mm-hmm. And I was sad because my mom was sick and all these other things were happening, and I needed something to channel that energy into. And so through that process, I learned to kind of trust myself, and that I could have a good idea, and that I could follow through on something, and that I could make something, and it was fun. And so the rest of the book isn't about furniture, but it's about things that spring from that. You
exactly.
know? Yeah, mm-hmm. Yeah. So like I started doing improv after that, and then improv led to, you know, me going to Italy and becoming an Italian and all these kind of things. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, it's very inspirational to me because what you mentioned, and I feel like a lot of people, you know, we focus a lot about the entertainment industry on this podcast, but I feel like anybody in any field probably feels like, you know, I have other interests. I have other things that I want to do. And there were people, I'm sure, where you were like, oh, I'm going to a life coach, or I'm doing all this stuff. And they're like, are you changing careers? Are you giving up a practice? And I'm always blown away by how you building a piece of furniture or you having an interest in Italian means that it's like, oh, well, you're going to be somebody else now. Like, do you find it kind of different that people are always like trying to box you into one place. And I don't know, I feel like you're really defying odds with this book to not be boxed in and do something else. Do you feel like you've kind of reached out on different limitations you probably had in the past? You've been kind of touching on that a little bit.
Yeah. So it was really interesting where there were some people from my old world that really embraced it and were really excited and supportive.
Yeah.
And like, wow, I didn't know you could do this, or you're learning Italian, or you're doing this, you're doing that. And some people, and at first I was hurt by it maybe, but like that weren't supportive, or maybe were judgmental, or maybe dismissive, or whatever it might be. And I really realized it was like people always respond to you with whatever's inside of them, whatever fear or whatever they don't maybe, and again, so like they had kind of a preconception of who I was and how I fit into their world. And if all of a sudden I'm doing those things, then what does that mean to them? And
right.
Yeah. But then what I discovered is the more then I really started following my heart, then I started, then I meet new people that were like just thrilled, like, oh, you're excited. This is exciting. And they were happy. I don't know. They just saw me that the person that was showing up then to them was who I was.
Yes.
And so there was no that judgment or trying to confine me or, so yeah, it's been an interesting ride. Like some people really have a hard time with it. Just, I didn't have a beard 5 years ago. And so people really got freaked out by that.
Really?
Just
wow.
Because I'm, in the and that's in the financial service industry. So I dressed and had my hair cut and everything
Sure.
like you'd imagine anyone in that, and I'm going to be done with that field in March of this year.
Oh,
March
wow.
of next year. So
yeah,
like,
I knew what you
literally,
meant.
yeah. So
what year is it? Yeah.
but I started, the more I kind of got in touch with who I was and what I wanted, I started dressing the way I wanted and growing my hair the way I wanted, and it freaked some people out.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because this is me. I actually considered you very well dressed when I came in. I was just like, okay, he's got a beard. I was like, this looks like a nationally acclaimed author, which you're going to be after this podcast episode.
Sweet.
Which speaking of, so Carlo was very kind to you guys, and he gave me a signed copy of the book, and it happened to have a cute, I say cute as in very accomplished gold stickers here that says Indie Excellence winner. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I won. That organization's been around for 15 years.
Okay.
And I won for the personal growth category this year.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh. No, wow, that is really touching. I'm glad that you did that. That's amazing. What an accomplishment for sure. See, you're dressed to be an Indie Excellence winner. So there you go.
There you go. I gotta tell you, publishing a book was probably the scariest thing I've ever done.
I was about to ask you, how was that process? Yeah.
Like, first it was hard just to write down, because it's vulnerable. It's vulnerable. You've read, it was hard writing it at first, just knowing my publisher was going to read it. She was a publisher editor.
Yeah.
And so then after about 3 or 4 chapters, something clicked in me and it just started flowing out. And she goes, I don't know what happened, but keep doing that. And that felt good and it was reaffirming. And so then we finished it. And one day she goes, okay, that's your book. And there was about 48 hours where I was just kind of terrified. I'm like, I can't. The imposter syndrome stuff kicked in. I'm like,
Yeah.
Who am I to put this out there? Nobody wants to read my stuff and nobody cares about what I have to say and all of that stuff. And then finally my brain was like, that's the message you're trying to give people, is it's okay to try something new. It can be scary. And so then I was like, okay, I'll do it.
Yeah. No, because I was actually, so last night I was telling Carlo I was reading this, and I always try to read a little bit before I go to bed. And that's exactly what I really appreciated about your book, was even 2 chapters in, I've been reminded, and I do try a lot of new things. Like I told you, I do this podcast, I do comedy, but I was like, oh, there's a lot of other things that we talked about the Italian heritage. I was like, I'd love to look back on my family and see where things were. So that's very inspirational. Thank you. Speaking of the Italian heritage, why don't you touch a little bit, since we've got your full Italian name on the cover of this book that you should get wherever books are sold. Why don't you tell us a little bit about exploring your Italian heritage? How did that come about?
Well, so when I grew up, Carlo I've only met one Carlo in St. Louis in my whole life. You know, the whole thing of having, and my last name was just crazy hard for everybody, right? And then all the things that kind of go along with that of just like, well, I always kind of made to feel a little weird by my name, just because of, I don't know, the people in St. Louis had never heard that before. So I always felt a little, I don't know, not sure what to think about that part of me. And my parents got divorced when I was young, so my dad was never around. So I really didn't understand. But when we were together, like so many like children or grandchildren of immigrants, he was like, "Well, you're Italian," and I was like, "You're a little kid." You go, "Okay," and then you look at a map and you're like, "That." But what does that mean? What does it mean to be Italian?
Right.
So when he died, I made a decision that I wanted to dive into that side of me. I had studied German in high school and college, and I could speak German. I took my boys to Germany, and I was like, you know what, this is fun. Why don't I learn Italian? And so we started diving into, and I told you we mentioned diving into getting Italian citizenship.
Yes.
And so that's a whole fun process because you have to get all these documents, and I didn't know a lot about my family's history. So I'm reaching out on Facebook to cousins. I'm like, do you know if Grandpa was a citizen or when he came over? And I start getting little bits of information from these different cousins. And one of them said, hey, there's this guy on Facebook that's from the town where Grandma and Grandpa are from. So she told me this guy's name, and I sent a request, and he responded back. And so I didn't know any Italian at that point. So he knows zero English. So he's sending information to me, and I'm using Google Translate, copy, paste, and then type it in there, copy, paste. And that's how we communicated. And so he's asking me, like, who are you? Who's your grandfather? You know, who's your grandmother? Where were they from? And finally, he gets enough information. He goes, okay, your grandfather is my dad's brother. So I'm your dad's cousin. I live in the house your grandfather was born in. You should come visit.
Wow.
And so,
oh my God. I can't wait to get to this chapter. Go ahead. Yeah.
So, and my sons and I had planned on going there the next summer anyway, to Italy, and they live in Sicily. So I'm like, oh, okay. And so, but he's like, none of the family spoke English. The younger generation did, but the people like my parents' generation did not. Mm-hmm. So I crammed as much Italian. I hired an Italian tutor and crammed as much Italian in my brain as I could. And then we get over there, and in 3 days we met 40 cousins. Got interviewed by it was like a little bitty, like 25. I think there's 3,000 people in this town. So like the newspaper came to interview us.
Oh, get out! That's so cute.
Like one of the cousins was like, "Who are you again?" And I explained. He goes, "Oh, so my grandfather came over 100 years ago." Mm-hmm. This guy said, "You're the grandson of the brother who left and never returned." It's still like a thing, like family. There's some stereotypes that are just true, and like the way I've been embraced by people in Italy as this guy who's come back to connect with his roots and meet his family and learn the language of his grandparents, it's beautiful. And they especially the family, they were so excited to meet us, and and that was the beginning of me learning Italian to connect with them. So
that is actually really interesting, because sometimes I think people forget today, and I say that as a generalization, but we didn't have social media back then. Like all the people I know in Italy, I can just go on Facebook, we like everything, it's all the people, but just to connect, you forget like, oh, that's right. Like people at one point immigrated to America and maybe didn't see
ever again
some of these people again. So that's the history that we leave behind. And it's so important. And I love that you highlight that in your book and in your podcast, to search for that. Even if your heritage is German or Irish, like it's so interesting to look back and see where your story began, because it doesn't just start with us, which is what you talk of, like you kind of referred to a little bit in here. But speaking of your story, you touched about vulnerability. Let's talk about the improv shop. So when you were, when you started improv, you said you ended up at the Tin Can one night.
Yeah.
How was that?
Okay. Well, so I was in the midst of like in my furniture building days, building all this stuff, and a buddy of mine, Mike McGuire, who he does Comedy Sports St. Louis.
Yes, I was like, that name, I don't know if I met him in person, but that name sounds super familiar. Very St. Louis there. Yeah.
Perfect. So he he called me, and he used to call me all the time when I was married and be like, hey, come see a comedy. He did stand-up comedy for a while, and he started doing improv. And just because we had little kids and all this stuff, I just never was like, I was always just kind of conditioned to say no, because I knew it just didn't work with whatever was going on.
Yeah.
So he called me, and I'm sitting at home alone on my couch. I was done working on stuff for the day, and he's like, you should come see an improv show with me. And I had no idea what improv was. And I was already formulating why I couldn't go. And then I just sort of had this like out of body experience looking down at myself, sitting in this empty room by myself. And I thought, dude, you're never going to ever meet another person if you keep, playing Skyrim by yourself in the evenings. So,
Right. Yes.
So I said yes. And Mike came and picked me up. I had never watched Whose Line Is It Anyway? I had no idea what improv was. So he took me to the Tin Can and watched a show. And I remember just looking at the stage thinking, I don't know how they're doing that or what that's all about, but that looks like fun. Mm-hmm. And so Mike's like, you should sign up. So he was doing some short form classes. So we signed up, and I started doing that, did that for a year. And then he was so supportive. He's like, oh wow, because you're really good. You should take classes at the improv shop. I think you'd like the long form. And I'm like, okay. Yeah. So I did that. So
because trying something new, why not?
Exactly. Yeah. So I was just in the mode of like, oh well, I could do this. Well, what if I did that? What if I did that? And so each thing like led to new experiences and meeting new people. And I wouldn't be sitting here right now if I hadn't done that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All those things that happened because I said yes to something. So
yes, see, and that's what I love about you. And like I said, it was such a good reminder because sometimes in life you are conditioned to be like, oh no, like it's fine. And sometimes I don't do it all the time, but I do fall into it at some point. Like I'll be like, maybe I shouldn't. But then I sit at home and I completely regret. I'm like, do I really need to be in sweatpants from '07 right now? Like I should be out like trying something new.
Yeah.
So that's what I love is that you put, and also I'm a nerd. I love to read. Not that you have to be a nerd to read, by the way, but I just love that you have it in book form. But you also, we are on a podcast, you partnered it up with a podcast. So I know you kind of touched a little bit about it in the beginning, but why don't you tell us a little bit about your podcast?
Okay. Well, so yeah, when I finished the book, and while Nancy was editing it, I just started thinking about the podcast again, and I'm like, I want to dive into. Again, I'm not trying to be a coach,
right?
But I want to provide examples. So I thought the best way to do it, and I started thinking of all the fun people I've met at the improv shop and while traveling in Italy and in Germany and different places around the world that all have fun stories. And I'm like, wow, what if I could figure out how to just talk to them and get them to tell their stories to help people, and bring on other guests. Like I've had a psychologist on the show, or a therapist, mm-hmm. and I've had 2 life coaches. And last week I interviewed someone that is she's a change specialist.
Oh, I haven't heard it yet. What is that, by the way? Just to touch on it for a minute.
So she has a company that helps nonprofits and then also a coaching service to help individuals look at their lives and what are they trying to do and create this mission statement to make the change that they want to make.
Wow.
And the whole point, sometimes one of the things is like, in order to do certain things in our life, we have to sometimes maybe stop doing one thing and start doing a new thing. And that's scary. And then people in your life may judge you and reject you. Some of the people you really love might like turn on you in some weird way, and so having the tools to do that and having a group of people to support you is important. So that's what I decided to do with the podcast. It's just have examples like that, and then as soon as I can travel again, starting next year, I want to go on the road and I want to be able maybe again, that's why I'm ending my career with financial planning. I want to be able to spend 3 or 4 months at a time in Europe, just traveling or taking classes, or I might enroll in the university over there and study. Yeah. And then you just do something like that. You're going to meet fun and interesting people, mm-hmm. and then find out what's their story. Why do you make olive oil, or why do you make Parmesan cheese, or someone that's an artist, or whatever it might be. Yeah. So that's what I want to keep. And again, I promised myself I'm going to do it as long as it's fun. And then, furniture led me to improv, which led me to Germany, which led me to Italy, which led me to book. So I don't know where it's going, but I'm going to keep following that thread.
Yes. No, I like I said, I know I've been saying this a lot, but I really do admire that. What I loved about, though, with the podcast and stuff, and I think that's where you and I can relate on, is that, you know, you're picking different people. Like, that's why I messaged you. I was like, you seem so interesting. And I just, like I said, I'm not trying to be like, you know, a guru or a teacher, but I'm like, I want to share Carlo with people. And you're sharing yourself through the book. What I always kind of wonder when you're writing a book like this, that is like so very touching and very meaningful, how do you choose between all these moments in your life that really meant so much to you that you put in these different chapters? What's your process?
Well, I felt overwhelmed by that.
Right.
I was like, it's all kind of like, you start thinking about it, it all just feels like a jumble.
Right.
And so I hired Nancy Erickson. She's got a company called The Book Professor.
Okay.
And her job is she helps people write nonfiction books. So I went through her process, and at the end of the process, I had a map, which the map was like each step was a chapter. And so, like, you know, chapter 1 is about learning to trust yourself. And she goes, what's an issue? How did you resolve it? And what's the like a story that kind of supports that? So she helped me lay that all out. And once that was laid out, it felt like it was just coming out of me. Like I would go to the Fiddlehead Fern.
Yeah. I used to live right up the street.
Really?
I went to their opening. I love that place. Yes.
I live like right by the park down this. Yeah. So yeah, I live really close to that.
Out.
Yeah. So that was my routine, is I'd get up and I'd walk down there and open up my laptop or sometimes my iPad and write until I couldn't anymore. So maybe some days it was an hour and some days it was 2.5 hours, and just wrote until it was done. Yeah.
That's how I used to write my plays. I would go to the Fiddlehead Fern and I would we're going to be new best friends, guys. We have so much in common. Trying something new friendships. Okay. But yeah, not to make this about me. Continue. Yes.
No. But no, that was it. And I just met with Nancy last Friday. Like I'm 80% done with an outline for my next book.
What?
Yep.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So when the outline's done, then I have to write the chapters, of course.
Well,
but
of
yeah.
course. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense. Well, like I said, I'm inspired by it, but I felt the same way because I'm reading through all these stories and everything. I mean, you did a great job. Everything was very like cohesive. I felt like everything flowed really well. So that's why I was just curious how you curated all of that together. It was probably such a process for sure.
Yeah, because I always loved to write as a kid and in high school, but I never it felt like, well, that's just an easy class. Mm-hmm. No one ever said, you're good at this. You know, when you're a kid, you're like, well, that's an easy class. I need to focus on these other things because they're the hard ones. No one ever said, well, if it's easy for you, maybe you're good at it. And
yeah. Yeah. No.
You know?
Yes.
And it was, decades later that I started to write again. So. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. I also love that you did a shout out to the Fiddlehead Fern. I haven't been there in a minute, and I loved that place. She always used to make the best cappuccino, so that's why I was like, oh, I miss. Now are they open back up again?
They're open, yep.
Yeah.
And then Darcy is the owner over there, and we're trying to coordinate a time to do like an author reading. And because I used to go in there every day and I would get the same thing. Like I'd get this bowl of eggs with like vegetables and stuff like that, and then a cold brew. Yes. Unless it was below about 60, then I'd switch to something hot.
Oh yeah. Of course. Yeah.
And I was afraid to like say out loud that I was writing a book. Mm-hmm. Like, because I thought, well, what if I don't? Each time I wrote a chapter, I'd walk back feeling really good. I'm like, well, what if that was it? What if I can't write the next one? Because I just was afraid that it would stop because it was flowing so much. It felt like it's going to stop. Like there's going to come a point where I won't be able to write the second, third chapter, or the fourth chapter, whatever. Mm-hmm. And so I never told anyone there that's what I was doing. So finally, when it was done, I saw Darcy one day. I'm like, hey, you remember when I used to be there like every day for a year? She's like, yeah. I'm like, I was writing a book. And so
she's like, what?
Yeah. Yeah. So that was fun. It was fun.
Wow. Oh, very cool. That, I mean, that's just, wow. That's just so impressive. And then now, where do you record your podcast too normally? Or do you just do it from home? Do you go to a studio? What's your process for that?
Yeah, I've been working with Shock City Studios.
Yeah, I know exactly where that is.
Okay, cool. Rich Harris is my audio engineer.
Oh, okay.
You know Rich?
I was like, I know of him. We've never met in person. And then, I don't know if you know Sam Mall. I've seen him do stuff too. Jeannie Latoud Mall, she's a photographer, and that's her husband. So yeah, and so I always see him.
Oh, is he the owner?
You know, I don't know.
Okay.
We'll find out, Sam. If you are the owner, you know, just kidding. But I see him post things about there all the time. I see a lot of people in St. Louis. Are they newer or?
Yeah, I don't know how long they've been open. They do a lot of bands go through there, and they do some podcast, and then they help me with my audiobook. Like, it's not done yet, so it's recorded. I have to listen to the whole thing, and with the book, and like make sure I didn't mess up anything. And that's been like, at the end of the day, you don't want to hear your own voice for an hour, right?
That's what's so hard about having to listen to these episodes is like, I love listening to you, and then I'll hear myself. I'm like, why did I laugh here? Or like, why am I like, like, it's so annoying, but it's all about Carlo, you guys. Buy this book, okay? Yes, but I understand. I was about to ask, like, how, I was thinking, you know, if you do an audiobook, but obviously shouldn't be surprised you're doing one. What goes into that? How do you do that?
Whew, that was exhausting.
Yeah.
So
just like reading a whole thing about your whole life and then just making sure it's clear and whatnot. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I talked to some people's like, no, you absolutely shouldn't read that. That's for professional voice actors. And I had other people I know. They're like, no, it's you. It's your story. You've got to.
I'm the second group.
Yeah. If it had been like a fiction, maybe then, you know,
for characters.
Okay. So, and then I'm like, well, I've done it. I got to be in a commercial. I got to do some different things, you know?
Okay.
Yeah. So I played a dad showing his son around SIUE.
Oh, cute.
Yeah, so
okay. I'm sure that made some people enroll. There we go.
Exactly.
Yeah. Give some royalties over to Carlo for anybody that's, you know, in the class right now.
So, yeah. So, I mean, the audio engineer, he had a copy of it, and I would read it, and sometimes he would say, "Nope, you didn't say that. You said this instead of that, or you switched those words around, or I don't think the emphasis was right on the end of that sentence." It was really good. I mean, like just very meticulous in the best way, so that because he really wanted to be the best. So so then I would read. If a sentence was perfect, then that was good, and then if I messed up the next one, we would only have to go back to where the beginning of that last sentence was. But the first session we booked 3 hours because I'm like, all right, I can do 3 hours. After 2 hours was my limit, and so it's voice acting, and so I was just tired. I could by the end of 2 hours I was having a hard time concentrating on reading, even though it was something I wrote. I hadn't read the whole thing since I wrote it, you know, and it was almost a year afterwards. So it was I'm glad I did. It was a great experience. But it was really tiring.
Yeah. I was about to say, as a stand-up comic, sometimes I'm tired after 20 minutes and I'm like, oh, I got 10 more to go. Oh my gosh. Like, yeah, I understand that. I understand the feeling a lot.
Yeah.
But what a cool experience for sure.
That was a fun experience. And so, yeah, Shock City helps me. I used to do every episode there, but my goal, like I said earlier, was trying to be able to do them on the road.
Yeah.
So I've been practicing. I did that with my business too. Like I've been practicing remote. So now I do everything remote, and I want to be able to eventually, like I said, get some really small equipment. And then if I'm in Rome and I meet an interesting person, we just sit down and do an interview or find a studio wherever I'm at and things like that. So I'm trying to they're doing my editing, but I'm still trying to be, I don't know, an on-the-go podcaster. So.
No, that makes sense. Even here, there was when I interviewed Tony Roberts, he was having a show at Helium, and I knew I wasn't going to be here because I was going to be in Cincinnati, and Tony was with his family in Detroit. So what we did with the studio here at Midcoast Media, just a quick plug, was that we did a virtual one, and I was in my dad's study in the basement,
right?
Which I have not been in for years. Like, so I'm like, it looks like so sophisticated. I've got these like books in the back. It's like all my Shakespeare like books from high school and stuff. And like Tony's like at his house in Detroit. but we made it work. And, it was the same thing. It's like, Tony's got a schedule. Like, he fit me in on Sunday. I was able to do it. So I don't blame you at all for feeling that, because you never know when inspiration strikes. Not trying to make it a cliche here, but it is true.
Yeah.
As well as, speaking of being on the go, do you have any, I know you said you want to travel moving forward, but do you have anything coming up that you'd like to let us know about being on the go at all, or for any podcaster, anything coming up? Or if you're just here, do you have any podcast guests that you want to highlight that we should listen to on the podcast?
Yeah, well, I was supposed to be in Dublin, Ireland, late August, early May, because my older son got into graduate school there.
Oh,
and so I was going to
congratulations to him.
Yeah,
Very cool.
Super excited. So we're supposed to, he's going regardless, but I was going to go with him and help him get moved in.
Sure.
And there was a couple of people there I wanted to talk to, but then like the 26th, whenever that was, Sunday, they changed some of the rules for quarantine.
Oh,
so
yeah.
it might be that I would go there and have to be in quarantine the whole time.
Yeah.
So we're kind of waiting. So if that doesn't happen, the soonest I would be there, when I would have enough time to do interviews, would be October of 2022.
Yeah. No, that's great.
Yeah, I want to go. I found a fun way to learn Italian as these immersion classes.
Yeah.
And they're not expensive, and they're fun. And then you can pick a subject that you want to learn about, which makes it even more interesting than like in school. If you took a foreign language, I was like, I didn't like language because you're conjugating verbs, and it's all kind of like artificial. Like I remember my German, Peter wohnt in Hamburg, like
Right, yes.
But I'm gonna the one I want to do in Rome is art history, but you're learning Italian. So
Wow.
you spend the morning studying Caravaggio, and then learning the vocabulary around some of his works. Then you, like, in the afternoon, take a field trip to see that painting and then talk about it with your teacher about that.
Very cool.
Yeah, so I want to do that. That's what I'm going to do in October. That's why I'm going to be there.
Oh, very, very cool. I know you went over and beyond. I was thinking, like, on the go, like, where are you going to go? Like, in St. Louis, what's happening? And you're like, I'm going to Ireland. I'll probably be in Italy. I'm like, I need to have these kind of goals, guys. No, I was just that sounds great. For me, I'm always thinking on the go. I'm like, what am I going to do next? What's going to happen next? But you seem to have like a really clear picture of what you want to do. Do you get that a lot? For something that's about a self journey, you seem so sure, but that's what's so interesting about this book, where you were like, I went through all this heartache and turmoil to get to where I'm at, but you just seem so put together. It's like you are. It's great. No, for me, why I say that is like, for somebody like me, like I told you, I'm trying to figure out who I am. I was about to say, like, how does it feel to know that you're just such an accomplished author and you've got all these things going on for you?
I just feel grateful. I feel grateful. I never would have asked for those things to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, like in 4 years, my mom died, my stepdad died, my dad died, and I got divorced, and I moved, and just there's all these things all in this period of time. I never would have asked for those.
Yeah.
But that broke down my defenses, broke down the whatever was in me that was trying to force myself to be what I thought I was supposed to be. Mm-hmm. And for that, I'm grateful. If I was on the backside of it again, if I like, would I ask for that? Mm-hmm. No, but I'm happy that I'm on the backside of it because when I took time to really think about what I wanted, and then every time I was able to take action on that, it led to such fun and beautiful things that now it's like I can't imagine not living like that. And it feels weird saying that out loud. Like I feel like
I kind of forced you to do it.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I forced you to be vulnerable with the question I just asked, so you can just blame me.
Okay. It feels. It feels just. You always know, like when people say, "Oh, I had a feeling that was not a good relationship. I had a feeling that wasn't the job I should have been." Yeah. And sometimes it's 2, 3, 4, 5 years later, then they're finally out of it. And like, oh my goodness, And again, it's not that I'm perfect or I make all the right decisions, but I've become much better at listening to that voice, like really quickly.
Yeah.
And and then at the same time, I've kept the practical side of me of like, well, how do I build a plan to do those things? Well, what do I have to give up in order to pay for that? And so I've really used like the financial planner brain of part of my brain to like, to get things out of my life that weren't bringing me joy or that were just, I was spending money on, and simplify my life so that then I can do the things that I want to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, because I was like, I'm sitting here, I'm talking to you, you're very intelligent, you have a great way with words, which again is why he wrote a book. Guys, make sure you get Afterlife. And it's amazing to think like, I would meet you not even knowing your story. I'd be like, oh my gosh, like I had no idea he went through all this stuff to get to where he is. But, again, it always goes back to the foundation and where you start, which, speaking of foundation, I'm sure you're family oriented. You've got your sons. How do they feel about, you doing this book and this podcast and going on all these, this new journey in your life?
That's been the greatest unintended joy, is because for so many years, like, and I'm not saying divorce is the answer, but it was for me. And I was unhappy, and I thought that I needed to stay married for my kids. And, I had this experience with this therapist that let me know, like, well, you're creating this archetype and they're likely to repeat that. And that just scared the heck out of me.
Yeah, yeah.
And so when I took a little step and a little step and a little step and a little step, and they've come along with me with such joy, and I've seen them, well, just my son go into school in Dublin, and the things that they're studying, and it's impacted their lives and planted seeds that decades from now will change the direction of their life. And it's just, again, it's not, I'm not saying divorce is the answer for everyone. And I'm not blaming, any, my ex-wife for any part of my life.
Of course not.
So
yeah.
What's great is though, is like, they get to see me, like Carlo, like the other Carlo was a facade of I talk about living a half life.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't speak my truth. I couldn't speak my truth to myself. And so they get to see that, and I know I've just the things I've seen them do, and that's been the greatest joy for me. It's like I'm not telling them you should do these things. They're getting to see me do them, and then they're trying and coming along with me and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a really beautiful thing. I'm sure you talk about it in the book too more. I just haven't gotten there yet.
Yep.
So I didn't mean to spoil anything in the book, but I just wanted to ask, and since I've seen things on Facebook and whatnot and social media, but speaking of people going the journey with you, why I think this book is very touching. And again, I talked about this kind of in the beginning, but to kind of round it out, I feel like anybody reading this is going to relate to this. Sometimes what I find with people who write a book locally or have a podcast, and I've had to learn this too, running my own podcast and whatnot. Sometimes when you know people or you do have like a good net of people, you can kind of fall into the trap of, well, these people know me, and so you have like the 10 people that follow you. You know what I mean?
Right.
Though? And I say this as a compliment to you, as this is really going to branch out to anybody in this country and the world, because we're all really trying to figure out, what should be us. Like there's many times where I have that imposter syndrome.
Yep.
Even as an artist or a comedian, or when I write a play, I'll market all this stuff, and social media is a great tool for that. But sometimes I'm like, am I putting in the work that I should be putting? And a lot of people, of course, are always like, oh yeah, you're fine. You have the people who believe in you. And, some people are like, why are you doing all this stuff? So I appreciate you with your vulnerability, taking something like this as a foundation and saying, hey, everybody, you're not alone, which I think is like a really great underlying message in this, is that we're all like, you were like, here's this facade of me, and now I'm starting this new journey. It started out with furniture, it went into improv, it went into Italian, but that's the thing. It's what we talked about earlier. It's that slow build into becoming who you want to be as a person. So I genuinely thank you, obviously, for coming on this podcast, but also putting this in a form and in a podcast where, certain people are like, oh, I like reading better, or I like podcasting better, or I like both. You've reached people at every aspect. So what I always end on is, what casual advice, which you've got a lot in here, but you can read this book anywhere, guys. But what casual advice would you give our listeners, or maybe even to yourself, that now? And it can be on anything. It could be learning Italian. It could be being on the go, podcast, whatever hits you in this moment. What would that be?
I have to go back to one of the very first thing that helped me kind of really set me on my journey was I worked with a coach, Ellie Richter.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. She's amazing. She's amazing. She's still doing coaching. But she said to me after several sessions, she's like, Carlo, you need to learn to have your own back, and you need to learn to be your own best friend. Mm-hmm. And so that was the beginning of me learning to trust myself. But it's just her saying that sounded so foreign and so wrong and so against everything, because this all the self-sabotage and all the things that we do to ourselves. I just be my own best friend. What? No, my happiness is in someone else or in another person, or I've got to, that I was always looking outside myself for that. So trust yourself. That was the first chapter. Trust yourself, because if you don't trust and love yourself, then you can't go to the next step. You have to have that, and then you'll, if the people in your life aren't supporting that, at least you have to, and then you'll find people that will also support you. So.
Yeah, absolutely. That beautifully said. Again, Grace, can we pop up the cover so that way people can see it one more time if you're looking at YouTube? The Afterlife by Carlo, Pietro, Sanfilippo, Waking Up from My American Dream is available Amazon and then Barnes & Noble.
Mm-hmm. And anywhere, any online, any bookstore should have it and be able to order it. So.
Okay. And then for the podcast, where can we find that?
If you just go to it's on all the platforms,
Yes.
Apple, Google, but if you just go to carloblog.com, you find the podcast link, and that'll take you to all the fun places.
Sounds good. Well, Carlo, we always say, again, thank you for coming on. And now that we're casually done recording, what are you going to casually do now with the rest of your evening?
Rest of my evening. I might have second dinner.
I don't blame you. What are we having?
I don't know. I might just snack on some stuff. I went to Parker's Table. Okay. And I got some good salami and cheese and a Chianti, and so I might just snack. I had sushi for my first dinner. I might have just some Italian for second dinner.
Nice. Yeah. I was about to say, I only had popcorn for dinner, but this guy's living his best life here. I'm probably gonna go get some real dinner. Just remember that you can casually subscribe to the podcast. Just remember you can go on Instagram at the Casually Molly Podcast, Facebook, stream audio wherever streaming services are, and of course you should subscribe on YouTube. I always forget to say this too. If you'd like to casually review the podcast on iTunes, let us know what you think. If Carlo's episode was your favorite episode, which it should be, let us know. And then again, just make sure to get his book. It was the Indie Excellence winner for a reason, guys. Well, Carlo, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time, and we'll see everybody next week. Have a good one.